As the prophet of esports, I rely on trustworthy and meaningful data every day. Data from our research partner YouGov offers the most complete view of esports fans and gamers in the world, providing context to who they are, what they think, the brands they buy, and things they do. YouGov's connected insights and research services inform strategy at every level. If you're a team, a brand, agency, or rights holder, you should be talking with YouGov. Their partners measure and maximize ROI and are telling compelling stories with data. Visit yougov.com/gaming-esports to learn more.
Well, let me make the second case that I heard. This is not my own idea. This is what I heard is, oh, this makes a lot of sense because you own these two massive tournament providers, right? And FACEIT's a lot of B2C meaning like if we, the four, want to create a little league, we could with FACEIT, but it's also they hold tournaments very regularly for people to participate in, right? And pro stuff, same with ESL. That, if you own tournament organization at this level and at this scale, you potentially own esports betting too, right? Like now you could be the biggest game in town from an esports betting perspective if you own all the leagues and all the tournament providers. That I think would be a compelling argument, very compelling. I would challenge you guys to give me a counter argument to that. Other than the fact that this was bought by the Saudis, right?
Yeah.
Gambling is very frowned upon there. And so what seems like the biggest business opportunity here sort of goes out the window. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
Well, I do have thoughts. I mean, I think the Saudi piece is interesting. It'll be interesting to see because ESL they had a gambling operator sponsorship, and then they also worked with like a data provider. I'm not entirely sure I would agree with your first premise about how if you own the largest tournament platform / the largest league, you're automatically going to dominate gambling. That may end up being the case in esports, but it definitely has not really been the case in like traditional sports. Like it's not like the NFL doesn't own gambling. In fact, you could argue they get a good chunk of money because there's a lot of like DraftKings and all these companies pay them like hundreds of millions of dollars a year for sponsorship, but it's not like they're getting B2C revenue. Like when I go on DraftKings right now in New York and make a bet on the NFL, like the NFL doesn't touch that money in any capacity. So it's not like they're in the ecosystem. With esports, that could end up being different, but I don't believe that it is currently. There could be an opportunity though with peer-to-peer betting, like FACEIT maybe could incorporate some player versus player betting, on their platform, which I think is a big opportunity. I don't know that that's something they've done yet, but it is potentially an option for them.
Chris says, I don't know, Stretch Armstrong. ESL sold for $86 million 6 years ago. Was there really that much growth in the space to garner $1 billion price tag? It's a good question, Chris. DreamHack's worth something. I agree it doesn't get you to $1 billion, but they did put ESL and DreamHack together, and these are both being acquired. And a lot has changed in the esports space in 6 years. I think the influx of money has, could you make the argument it's the influx of cash has increased tenfold? Maybe. The question I put back on you is how are people justifying the $1 billion valuation for MTG, right? You assume markets for the most part are pretty rational.
What was that valuation before last week, right? Because obviously once you're getting $1 billion in cash, that's going to be your valuation. So I would want to know what it was last week.
I haven't looked at the chart for MTG, so I don't know sort of how that has.
Because it's like the old Allied Esports thing where they have like 100 million market cap, but they're getting like, or they have 105 million in cash. So I don't know. Looking at the market cap in that case would give you the indication.
We'd have to convert the currencies here, but
these damn zlotys are so confusing.
The chart looks pretty flat. Like if you look at sort of the MTG chart,
so it's not like it jumped.
Meaning,
massively.
Obviously, there was a huge jump when they announced the deal, right? No question. But like the month or two before that, pretty like it's not like there was huge price action on the stock. That's something I think we'd have to dig a bit deeper I'd have to dig a bit deeper to have any sort of intelligent opinion on. But I mean, Chris, you bring a good point, and I don't know if anyone has a good response to this. Is there that much growth? Jimmy, I don't know if you have a thought or
not that I've
future.
Seen.
Right?
And that's your argument, though, is the potential, which is a good argument, but does it justify the high price tag now? Could they have gotten it for cheaper? What are the other opportunities that they could have invested in for cheaper or done the same thing? These are all good questions, and I'm scrolling through my tabs here, just trying to get more info. What I can share, actually, as a instructor of esports at UCI, where I've had some students from this part of the world that have taken the classes, is culturally, I know they like to go big or go home. And they shared with me a lot of their projects. They're not interested in the smaller plays. This isn't just a $1 billion acquisition, right? This is also a merger of two smaller companies with synergies and, like Paul said, potential. So, and not to mention, this is probably the biggest, as you mentioned, name in that part of the esports industry. So they're also buying a brand and establishing themselves, or I don't want to say establishing themselves or redefining themselves, but rather they're affiliating now this Saudi-backed Savvy Gaming with ESL, probably probably one of the biggest brands, I think, and known companies in that part of gaming. So the way I look at it is just, it's massive. Yeah, Paul, you made the argument for potential, but it's also like they're not just buying a tier 2 or a tier 3 company, and they're not just buying a company to assume and run it, right? They're buying the most well-known, and then they're doing something bigger with it and trying to take a big swing here. So I do respect that. I just don't know if it justifies the high price tag or if they could have done it in another way. Go for it, Jeff.
So, is it possible that the Saudi, number one, I guess the Saudis have not always been known to be the smartest money. They have a ton of money and they definitely are aggressive, as you mentioned. But is it possible that they're making a bet that the future of esports is a lot less publisher centric and a lot more, tournament organizers like an ESL coming in and owning the esports scene? And I think about that in the context of the Microsoft Activision deal, where we posited last week or 2 weeks ago on the show that maybe Microsoft was going to look to outsource Microsoft was going to look to outsource Activision's esports once the deal closed. Is it possible that, this deal is essentially the Saudis saying, well, look, all of these leagues, these publishers are going to want to outsource their esports, and if we're the biggest player in town, we essentially become the owner of all these esports leagues. Like, is it a play for that, or is that just too kind of meta brain?
I think that's a super interesting idea, and I wouldn't be surprised if that is part of the thinking. I thought you were going to take that in a totally different direction, Jeff, which is maybe this is the first volley as part of a much bigger strategy. And to Jimmy's point, like, you're talking about an investment fund that manages like $1 trillion, right? And so, $1.5 billion is, as weird as this sounds, like a relatively small investment for them, right? This is not a huge investment when you're managing $1 trillion. And I wonder if this is not just a precursor to, seeing an announcement where the Saudi, public investment fund is putting 20 billion, 30 billion to work buying huge chunks of, Epic Games or Discord or, whatever other big developer that's still out there, Roblox, or, that this is just them setting up what is a much, much bigger vision and a play where they want to bring not only esports to the region, but they want to make a huge they want to send a message that Saudi is serious about gaming and that they're smart about it, and then they're going to put money to work there. Like you mentioned, interesting, they're buying tournament providers and not, game developer. I'm like, well, maybe they're going to buy a game developer, right? Maybe that's just a week away or 2 weeks away or a month away. And this is just the first volley. That would not surprise me, to be honest. I would not be surprised to see a much larger amount of money coming soon, and making this an even bigger play.
Take Two.
It would make sense from a like a vertical integration standpoint. Makes a ton of sense.
When she says, "Congrats on the EG New Jersey gaming license."
Thank you.
Greg says, "Could this be a location play bringing esports to the region?" I think, Greg, there's no question, right? And there's like a lot of pride around these kinds of things. And Jimmy's point, I think, is spot on, that they don't like to do anything small. So if they're going to do something, it's going to have to, it has to make waves. Chris says, definitely, Greg, Overwatch League and CDL finals at the new esports hub. Neom is a play. Greg says, hold major events in Riyadh. Yeah, I think both of you guys are spot on this. Like, I truly believe that both of those things, all of these things will come true, and we will start to see, Saudi really being a player in the esports world, in the gaming world, because they have virtually unlimited resources to do so. So once the conviction is there, money is not a problem. That's kind of the beauty of their approach. Any other thoughts on this, guys, before we move on? An interesting one. And I really love what's going on in MENA around gaming and esports. Like, to me, a lot of people focus on India and the opportunity there. I think there's really not enough attention on what's going on in the Middle East, and a lack of understanding around how they do things there. Because again, once they have conviction, the money flows. So it's an interesting one.
I just want to add, actually, we're gonna, as we read 2 or 3 more announcements like this coming out of there, I think a bigger picture is going to start to get painted, right? We're trying to fill in pieces and put on our tinfoil hats with 1 or 2 stories every once in a while, and trying to figure out where their strategy and direction is headed. But as more of these announcements come out, it's going to be a lot more engaging of a discussion. So stay tuned.
Neil says, if Paul sold his sneaker collection, he could have outbid the Saudis on ESL FACEIT. Neil, I wish. The Saudis probably one of the only groups I can't outbid. Let's leave it at that. When you're managing $1 trillion, this is next level. Wenji says, it's a bit like they're massively into Brazilian jiu-jitsu and do ADCC and sponsored it for years themselves, even though quite niche. But if they love an interest, commit and invest to run events, etc. Yeah, it seems like a niche market. It's really not, because there's so much disposable income that even though they don't have the numbers, the demographics from an income perspective work in your favor in a big way. So it's sort of why I like the US versus China as a market. People think, China's the big opportunity because of the sheer numbers. But if each user is spending 1/10 or 100th of what a user here is spending, it all shakes out. So interesting to see. Neil, I love that comment. That's my favorite.